Do you think there's a timeline for grief, and do people ever get over their losses?
I'm certain that there's absolutely not a timeline for grief, and we don't actually get over our losses. We learn how to deal with them and incorporate them into our lives. There's a lot of misunderstanding about grief and an idea that we're supposed to hurry up and be done and feel fine and get on with our lives. And this is an experience for us to have. And when we allow ourselves to feel the pain and the confusion and different things that go on as we're grieving, we have an opportunity to learn so much about living our lives better. And I wish we give people more time to have that full experience.
I couldn't agree with you more, Ginny. I think there absolutely is not a timeline for grief. It's not a linear kind of experience either. And I would say, I think of grief as sort of a fingerprint. Everyone is unique in how they grieve. There are some universal themes or feelings that we experience, but the way that we experience and the way that we work through them is unique to each individual. There's no right or wrong. There's no time frame associated with it. And I would say, particularly in the world of caregiving, the grief is sort of unique in that from the moment you get the diagnosis of a loved one and they begin to change, you begin to grieve the losses you see in terms of their medical, their physical, their cognitive, and their psychological abilities. So that compounds it for caregivers because they're losing the person they knew in addition to eventually losing the person when they die. So it's a double kind of loss or grief.
I certainly agree with all of what you're saying, especially for adults. I think we do not have a timeline. We don't get over our grief, we go through it. I think there are some important differences for children, however, because for children, we have to remember that knowing is a process. Just understanding what death means is difficult for a very young child. My niece was 3 when her mother died, and the concept of death and permanence and forever were her first challenges. Can mama come back? Will she be where I used to see her? So children don't know what we tell them. They know only what they understand. And that understanding changes as they grow and receive information and are able to have a deeper and deeper understanding of what they have lost. That means the feelings come back for them, and their timeline, if you will, evolves with them because they are growing. No child at 5 can understand what it's going to feel like at 15. They cannot project ahead and imagine what they will need or want or how it will feel to have lost a parent in 5 or 10 years. And none of this means they didn't do it right at the beginning. None of it can be prevented. We simply need to be able to be with them at every stage of the loss to help them understand it, then build some resilience and move on.
I agree, Mary. I've seen that with children that I've worked with, and also with myself, of how as we go through each developmental stage, the grief reopens and we have the opportunity at that new age to understand it brand new and to relive it and to grow with it. And I think what you were saying too, as we're speaking to the child when they're little, if we're telling them the truth, we're providing them tools. It's almost like in a fairy tale where you put the little pebbles on the road so that the children will go through the forest. And we're dropping those for the children so that they can have healthy growth as they're changing and learning about this terrible loss that will be with them the rest of their lives.
That's correct, yes.
I really, feel very moved by what everyone's saying. You can tell this is a group of people who are up close and been deeply connected with grief. One of the ways I think about it, maybe a slightly different lens as a trauma therapist, is that I think about what are the internal and external resources that a grieving person has. And the factor of internal, certainly, as Mary said, could have to do with the age. A younger child has less internal resources, and different children have more or less external resources in terms of people who will talk to them, people who will acknowledge the loss, community support, rituals. So I think what you want is a bite-sized loss that's appropriate for the developmental stage people are at and the resources they have. Like, I remember when my daughter was 5 years old and she lost the guinea pig contest. So that was a great bite-sized loss. She was heartbroken. But at 5 years old, as Mary was talking about, to lose a parent is not a bite-sized loss. It's actually too much for the internal, and there's clearly a need for enormous external resources. And
but Laurie, don't you think too that resilience is a muscle, and we exercise it at every age and stage, and at 5 you can only exercise it so much, but if at each age we help a child build the resilience with the correct responses, the right support, the opportunities to express what they feel, what they're questioning at that moment, then that muscle gets built for 10 and 12 and 15.
I agree with that. And what we know is the number one factor of resilience is the ability to seek and use social support. So if someone sees the world, or was it your niece?
Yes,
Mary?
my niece.
Sees the world as a safe place, she will reach out to you, to a cousin, to a teacher, and that makes a huge difference. If it's a child or an adult who's isolated or who's told to keep it a secret, or just is in a situation where whatever is causing them to be isolated and they can't use social support, the resilience isn't going to be as hardy.
And I want to say, I'm so glad we're talking about resilience, because when I worked with children, the whole community kept saying, oh, children don't need support. They're just naturally resilient. And I said, they are if we help them. It's just this mistake that children just get over it because they don't understand what's going on. And that's not true. They understand a lot more, but they only understand it at their age group. So it's different. And for little children, I'm sure you all realize that for them, it's always, is everybody going to die? And who's going to take care of me? So that's a little bit different than what adults go through.
But that's the question that we were starting with. What is the timeline? The timeline is the entire childhood until a young person really understands and is able to feel all of the stages of knowing that their parent, and I'm talking about parental loss here, that their parent is not going to be with them, and to be permitted to feel that at each stage, even if the actual loss is 5 or 10 or 15 years before.
I think that's really true, Mary. And also, as adults, when we're dealing with children and trying to help them cope with such an enormous loss, our two main jobs are to provide them safety and structure, and to also, I think they look at us to see how we're responding to loss. And so we have to be very cognizant of the way that what we're doing is modeling things for them too, for kids that are older, for kids that are 10 on up, 10 to 12, and then up through teenagers. And particularly the teenagers, the kids that are 13 to 19, they're able to articulate their thoughts and their feelings, but they need that sense of safety, support, and they need to see us doing that in order to feel comfortable sharing their feelings too. So I think that's really important. As you said, the little ones don't have any concept. They don't understand that death is irreversible. They don't have the words, the language, or the understanding. But that ongoing issue of safety and support, I think, is so enormous no matter what the age is.
Absolutely.